Okay, welcome everyone. We are about to commence this panel, and thank you everyone for joining, and thank you for the panelists who are here, some who are on the road, and I appreciate everyone taking this time at a very busy moment in Sri Lanka. But it's also a very critical time when we're facing an unprecedented political and economic crisis. I don't need to go into all the details. I think everyone is aware what's been happening in the last few months, but more recently we have seen the scarcity of essential items, long power cuts, long queues in trying to obtain essential items, unfortunate deaths of individuals who've had to stay in line. And this has become, and many other issues, including the issue of the fertilizer ban impacting the agriculture and food security in Sri Lanka. And we not having sufficient dollars to obtain essential items, including medicine. So we are seeing different sectors affected and people really facing the brunt of it. And as a result of all of this, we have seen since coming to the streets peacefully protesting. I would say early March, it started in the suburbs of Colombo, it spread to different areas. Now we have an unprecedented number of people gathering at Golfes, which is now called Gota Go Home. And more recently, there is another location in front of Temple Trees that has commenced a protest. And we need to be very mindful at this moment when we talk about the crisis and the different developments that's happening in Sri Lanka, that the people are demanding, very peacefully demanding for change in government and governance. And we can go into some of these things in terms of what are these demands, what does it impact, and how the parliament and the members of parliament are responding to these demands. But a recent survey we did from CPA, the social indicator, indicated some factors I think many of us are aware of, that this government is extremely unpopular. 9 out of 10 indicated that Mahinda Rajapaksa, the Prime Minister, should resign. A high number also indicated that the president, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, needs to resign. 96% said that all members of parliament need to be audited. So there is not just the calls for the resignation of the president and the prime minister, but also accountability of the members of parliament. Now, this is also at a time where we are seeing the opposition moving several proposals, and we will go into some of it in a bit in the discussion. We have proposals of 2 no confidence motions, two private members' bills in terms of one abolishing the executive presidency and the other one reverting back to the 19th Amendment. We also saw the cabinet having approved certain proposals, and we'll have to see what that entails. I don't think there's much information in the public domain. There's also questions of impeachment. So there's different processes that are being discussed. And we have 4 members of parliament who can speak to some of these initiatives. But that's also looking at particular issues in terms of the constitutional and legal issues. We also have to recognize that this crisis is affecting citizens, the hardships faced, and the fact that we have, during the war, we faced a lot of hardships, particularly the minority communities, but this is affecting everyone in Sri Lanka. But the question of budgetary allocations need to be looked into, whether the allocations now in terms of the defense getting such a high allocation is feasible at this moment. That is one thing. What is the role of the committees? And we have individuals who are either very involved in the committees now or who were involved, and they could speak to some of this in terms of the role of parliament and the social security aspects that we also need to look at. So there's a lot of issues to cover. And we have 4 eminent members of parliament. I don't think I need to go into a lot of introduction into them because all of you know them. But very briefly, we will have Mr. Sumanthiran, who is a member of parliament from Jaffna, who's also a president's counsel and been very involved in some of the processes I mentioned, who can speak to some of the issues that are in play. He will speak first. We then have Dr. Harini Amarasuriya, who is a member of parliament from the NPP, a nationalist MP, but also very active in terms of social issues, economic issues, and being very articulate on some of these issues, but also has an academic background. So I hope she can raise some of these issues in terms of what it means for Sri Lanka moving forward. We then have Dr. Charitha Herath, who is a member of parliament from the SLPP, but also the chairman of COPE, and hopefully can speak to some of the issues that we are seeing in that particular committee, which is very relevant at this moment. And finally, we'll have Eran Wickramaratne, member of parliament from SJB, and SJB has now sent in a private members bill in terms of abolishing the executive presidency. So there's a lot of issues and 4 eminent members of parliament who can speak to it. So let me start by Mr. Sumanthiran, who hopefully can take us through some of the key things that are in the pipeline when we go into parliament this week, but what it also means for Sri Lanka and the citizens.
Thank you, Bhavani. So the crisis, which is really an economic crisis, has developed into a political crisis, unsurprisingly. I say unsurprisingly because
Mr. Sumanthiran, I think he's frozen. He was in Vaunia. Let me try to call him. I think we'll have to wait till he connects. In the meantime, okay, he is connecting. Apologies for the technical glitches. Mr. Sumanthiran, over to you.
Yeah, sorry. And then sort of developed into a full assistance movement. I would say that the people have identified the causes very quickly because I think the opposition parties have been warning the government. In point of fact, I came across something recently which I remembered when I saw it before the presidential election in November 2019, when the SLPP at the propaganda said that they will lower the VAT rates and the tax reliefs will be given to people. The finance minister at that time, Mangala Samaravira, warned and said, if these are implemented, the country will go bankrupt and will become like some other countries he named, and how prophetic that has been. As they came into office, they implemented those tax cuts and raised the threshold for income tax and corporate tax, etc. And the direct impact of that was 25% less income from the anticipated revenue, and about a third of our taxpayers went out of that tax debt. Now that's a huge impact. So it was not something that was not known that was known, that was warned even before the presidential election. But after the presidential election, obviously targeting the parliamentary election, these sweeteners were thrown at the people, and that was the fact that Sri Lanka had borrowed blindly during the war years was the background cause. More than 70% of our expenses annually was borrowed and paid. So long as we could borrow, we didn't worry about it too much. Successive governments didn't worry about it too much because we were not defaulters, and this immediate cause became apparent. Our ratings dropped, and as a result, we were shut out of the international finance markets, and that was a direct cause for Sri Lanka having to dip into it, pay the dollar bills. So this is the immediate cause, and the people rightly identified the immediate causes and said, go home, because the president primarily is responsible for this state of affairs. So the family rule and other factors that were obviously known to the people about the corruption, the levels of corruption, all of that has been brought out, and they naturally want was responsible of office. Quite strangely, Sri Lanka government then we are going to be independent from now. So it was a little strange that they continued to sit on the government side and said that they were independent. And when we continuously challenged it, the next week they crossed over and started sitting in the opposition. I don't know the number quite yet, but I think maybe about 15 to 20 who still sitting on the government side and have written to the Prime Minister that he must step down and claim that they are independent. So this state of affairs has suddenly brought the government also into a standstill. All the cabinet ministers except the Prime Minister resigned. And so the president then appointed another few people. First he appointed just 4 people as a cabinet. Then he has appointed a few more. And so the government has been sort of limping along, and we don't know for how long, what changes are awaiting. So it is at this time that a few instruments have been brought. People want the government to go home, the president to go home. So the opposition has come up with 3 or 4 ideas. Only one has been formally tendered, and that is the SJB General Secretary's private members bill to abolish executive presidency in toto. So that is there as a private members bill. Then those who became independent and later crossed over have also tendered a private members bill, and that is just to repeal the 20th Amendment and reenact the 19th Amendment. So that's pending. But right from the word go, there was this claim that there will be a no confidence motion on the government. And signatures were collected by the main opposition party, but that has not been tendered as yet. And then another no confidence motion has been spoken about, and that is against the president. Now, the difference between these two no confidence motions is that if a no confidence motion against the government is adopted, from that moment, the cabinet stands dissolved. And then the president must appoint someone as prime minister who, in his opinion, is the person who commands the confidence of the majority. The problem with that is the biggest culprit, the president, still remains in office. Not only does he remain in office, he gets to choose his cabinet all over again. Now he has chosen twice after this event. He gets to choose his own cabinet a third time round. And what is worse, all those who supported this government until now, even through the passage of the 20th Amendment, might be in that cabinet because they have suddenly become independent and may have crossed over, not crossed over, but they might be in that cabinet. So there is no change whatever, just a few names changing, but basically the same government continuing, and that I think would be trying to fool the people. But I don't think the people will be fooled because their call has been a very strident go home. So that is why the other no confidence motion, although the getting rid of the president is not all that easy under our constitution. The only instrument that can be used for that is the impeachment, but that we know can take up to a year or more, and therefore is useless in the circumstances. So there was this idea by Mr. Nihal Jayavikrama in an article, and that has been now taken on board, and another no confidence motion drafted, I think, which is to pass a no confidence motion on the president. It has no legal consequences. Nevertheless, under Article 42 of our Constitution, the President is responsible to Parliament for the due exercise of his duties, functions, and powers. And that body itself, to which he is responsible, that body is also a representative body of the people. And that body says we have no confidence in the President. Then, under democratic tradition, there is nothing else that he can do but to resign. Whether he'll do that is another story, but that is what is expected in any democracy. And so now that is also in the works, and I hope the main opposition party brings those two no confidence motions to Parliament next week.
Parliament this week, no, Mr. Sumanthiran?
Yes, this week. I'm still living last week.
Yes, we could take more questions. We can take questions on these after the speakers. Harini, do you want to go 10 to 12 minutes?
Okay, thank you, Bhavani. I'm going to step out of the constitutional discussion for a moment and try to kind of frame this in a slightly broader frame. I think it's really important that we understand correctly this current political moment and this current sort of moment of resistance that we are facing, because I think that will our failure to really grasp the transformative potential that has emerged in the past several weeks. If we do not understand this or grasp this properly, I think we will be missing a huge opportunity that we have today to actually reflect on seriously on some of the mistakes we have made in the past, and also to take corrective measures. So, as Mr. Sumanthiran also said, we know that this started, this whole public resistance started very much in response to the economic issues that people were facing, the fuel crisis, the energy crisis, food security issues, fertilizer issues, This was the basis for the protests to start, and we saw this happening actually quite a few months ago with the farmers coming out on the streets several months ago with regard to the fertilizer issue. But we don't think that this is restricted now to an economic issue anymore, that the public are fighting anymore purely for economic issues. If you look at what is happening, and also I think that this is what is so interesting about this moment, is that is how dynamic these protests have been, and how dynamic this resistance space has become, where things are changing and evolving very fast. So what started out primarily as an economic issue has now become very much a resistance, as you also said, that's begun a conversation about governance, right? About political culture, about corruption, about nepotism, about the relationship between the citizen and the rulers, about accountability, questions of national identity. I think all of these issues have now come into this space, and are generating really important and critical conversations among citizens also. I don't think that at any point now we can claim that there is any consensus on any of these issues, that people have any agreement about how to move forward. So you can see that, the slogans are still directed towards the immediate sort of removal of this particular regime. But I think what this resistance has done, what these protests have done, is to mobilize people around much bigger issues, which I think as a country, we really need to hear, and we really need to take account of. So we see this really as an opportunity for meaningful transformation. And I think in that sense, we are all being challenged as political parties, as the government, as to think afresh, we're being pushed by the public, as it were, to get out of our comfort zones and to address this, and to look at this a little more imaginatively, and to look at this a little more radically, right? And I think it would be a huge mistake if we do not grasp this opportunity. I think and to do that, I think we need to have some patience, but above all, we need to have some humility to work with what's happening now, to work with the process, to sort of accompany this process as it happens and as it unfolds. Because, as I said earlier also, it's a very, very dynamic process that we are experiencing right now. There are really difficult questions that are being raised, and I think those are the kind of questions that we really need to address and to focus on. I mean, I have questions about this very sort of easy, comfortable binary that has been constructed between the bad politician and the good citizen, as if these are two separate. And I think that those kinds of binaries, which are easy and popular right now, need to be seen in a slightly more complicated. We need to look at the fact that while right now we are focusing on this regime and the Rajapaksa family in particular for very good reasons, I think we also need to understand that this is not just a problem of this government or even of just the Rajapaksas, although the Rajapaksas in many ways symbolize all that is wrong with our political culture and our political system. I think it is an opportunity to look at how our media has functioned, how social media in a way has kind of challenged our understandings of media. I think very importantly, and I think it's beginning to happen now, the relationship between the minority communities and majority communities. I mean, how do people in the North and East view this? How do they feel when suddenly the South is sort of talking about this moment as like a unique moment, when we know for a fact that during the war years, people in the North and East faced similar, if not worse, situations for decades, right? So how do we account for that? How do we respond to that? How do we incorporate some of those concerns that people in the North and East have been fighting for several years, and make this moment also part of their that ongoing struggle. So in that sense, when you look at all of what is happening outside and the conversations that are taking place, we really feel as if the parliament is no longer representing what is happening outside. That's the real contradiction and the challenge that we face. No longer represents the will of the people. It's a different that came into power with the 2/3 majority and sort of this huge wave of popularity, no longer represents the will of the people. So how to find a solution within this parliament, I think, is the critical question, because any solution that comes through these members who are already sort of no longer, especially the majority, who are no longer representative or even sort of who lost their mandate to all intents and purposes, how we can find a solution through this parliament, I think, is a critical question. So although constitutionally they may be the ones with power, they may be able to show numbers, I think in terms of sort of any ethical or moral consideration, they no longer have any right to decide on anything on behalf of the people of this country. And I think that reality has to be understood, and that's the reality that I think is important for us as the opposition members to also take into consideration. So yes, the no confidence motions against the government and the president are important, and we will support those. But any discussion about any kind of interim government, I think, is much more complicated, and will need to be discussed at length, because we don't want to be part of a sort of an interim government that is going to provide solutions when members of that interim government have been rejected by the people in any sort of a way that actually matters, right? So we think that a fresh mandate is absolutely important right now, that the people have made it very clear that this set of politicians and leaders are no longer in line with the way of what they want and the way they think. So then we think the people should be given an opportunity to make a new selection. And I think even these kind of severe economic problems that we are facing cannot be resolved unless we have in place a government that has the trust of the people, that has got a mandate from the people, and that the people see as legitimate. So it is with that that we will be moving in the next week in any discussions that come up in Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you, Harini. And I think you frame it very well in terms of this particular moment. And I think this is something we also hear from the protesters and those who are watching this. It's quite a unique moment, but how do you also make the most of it in terms of all the demands that have come about, and the demands are loud and clear, but also expectations, what is possible, and this very important question in terms of the role of Parliament, and is it relevant? I mean, there is, this whole thing about the tagline Pannamo is coming up quite a bit, and now you also have in the Galface a board representing the four of you and others. There's a picture with all the 225 members of Parliament saying, are they going to do what is needed? So there are lots of questions in terms of your role, but also is Parliament able to address it? And I think this is something we need to go a bit into. Charitha, I will turn to you. I think there are lots of questions that earlier two panelists have raised, but also hopefully you can also raise the whole issue of some of the members of Parliament, the so-called independent members, now the talk of a potential consensus government. What does it all mean? And how does this whole point about accountability, political accountability come in as well? So over to you, Charitha.
Thank you, Bhavani. Thank you for inviting this very timely needed discussion. And it was very interesting to hear to my good friends' submissions and presentations on this issue. Yeah, this is very unprecedented kind of political activity that we are experiencing right now. I agree with both of them that this is very important and very critical conjuncture that we all are in. As a member of the government party or member who is representing the government party, I think we have huge responsibility, and we also need to take some of the actually blamed on some of the decisions that made after 2019. But I think in very clear terms, I think this is a very serious economic issue that we all are engaging in. And we as a government from 2019 have been making some decisions which were also not very productive and which were not very proactive in the economic terms. But this economic issue has been there throughout last 20 odd years, and mainly after 2008 we are having huge economic issues, though that issues were not shown to the society in that terms. I think Eran might agree with me that even almost all the times from 2008, the Treasury and the central bank have been having this issue, and they were just showing completely different picture to the society. But the real issue of economy was not the thing that we have seen. However, it was now we are having a huge economic crisis. My first point is that this whole issue came into this level due to this economic issue. It was not the top good governance. It was not a request of something else, but it was started with this economic difficulties, and now it turns into very vast and very different political issue. The second point I would like to make is that how we could, as parliamentarians, as Bhavani asks, how we could face and get rid of or manage this kind of situation. This is, I think, this is what I think important issue at the moment. Now we are passing this third week of this immediate uprising, and we are now going to meet the parliament day after tomorrow as the third parliamentary sitting week. The people are thinking that the president is not making productive contribution to get rid of this issue, and the parliament is also not engaging up to the level that I think they have valid reason to think so. I am not going to talk on behalf of the president or the government here. I just would like to put my independent thoughts. I think we can't pass this issue without touching productively it in this week. I think we are coming into a very critical conjuncture. We just need to engage with it very productively. So how could we do that? We can look at this issue from very academic point of view or very political point of view. But in practical sense, what are we supposed to do in this kind of situation is the main issue. Some could argue that, yeah, why doesn't the president resign, or why can't we have an election? And these kind of things could be easily said, but in practical terms, there are some other sides of the coins. So president was elected by the people, and now some people ask him to go. So he could reply that, do I need to go? I know that there are some people who are asking me to go. So now what is the basis for me to act on that some people? So whatever the number that you can count, or whatever it is that you had also done some survey research and all these kind of things. But now the position of the president's office is that he has a mandate, and he has to get through this issue, and he has to manage this situation. At the same time, now Parliament, as now Harini said, who has the mandate now? Harini said that now the mandates or the representations of the people by the Parliament is now very problematic. Nobody knows that who has the mandate. Actually, who has the mandate? Now we have to recognize, and we have to agree upon and practical terms, that we have to assume that the people, the representations are in the Parliament. I know that if we have election now, right now, there might be many different results, and the representation would be definitely changed. But at the moment, what we have is the instrument or the tool that we have selected as the representation of the people. So we just need to go through or work with them in order to get out from this whole mess. So that is why I think the first important issue is to look at how we could form a practical, stable governments or governments in the center. So that is the first priority in my list. I am not saying that we just need to go into that one. Whoever would be fine, but we just need to have a discussion on that, and to see that how we could form a practical, stable government. Number two, we need to maintain this existing Parliament up to some level. I don't know what would be the age or whatever, what would be the end of this Parliament, maybe 6 months, 8 months, or 1 year, whatever it is. We just need to agree upon that. That is number two. Within that period, you need to have majority to govern the country. Then the third thing, I think, would be to get some reform done, as some of the protesters requested or demands. Even we can make use of this opportunity to get some important reforms in order to get public awareness on many new laws. And also there are 3 different amendments, or the draft of the amendments were presented to the Parliament as 20 first amendments to the constitutions, that we could work ahead. And at the same time, there are discussions going on the abolition of executive presidency. I think that is very crucial, important issue. And there are 2 different arguments on this thing, and we just need to look at where we are going from that positions, whether we are going to go ahead to abolish the executive presidency, or we just need to keep it with some amendments. That is number 3. So I think my checklist, or my kind of priority list engage mainly 3 activities. One, form a very important timely needed thing, the government. I know that there's a government today, but I think it is not stable, and it is not it cannot address some of these issues. Number 2, to get a parliament in order with kind of agreements between parties. Number 3, go into some reforms. Then we can end this whole period with the new elections, as Harini suggested. We just need to look at what is the position of the people, and the representation should be reworked, and then we will be able to go ahead with new plans. I think these are the three main functions that we just need to engage as parliamentarians and as concerned citizens. Yeah, I can stop here and we can have a discussion later.
Thank you, Charitha. And I think your points are well noted in terms of stability, in terms of thinking about the role of parliament and reforms. But I think there's also other ways of bringing stability, and it's also provided in the constitution in terms of electing a president through parliament as well. So I think that's an option that we also should be looking at, and that we can go into the discussion. But thank you for sharing your thoughts. Eran, I would come to you now, and I think the three speakers before you have spoken about this particular moment, some of the proposals, but also in terms of looking to the future. And I think in terms of the main opposition party, it will be good to hear from you also in terms of, other than the private members bill that's now presented to the speaker, and the proposals Mr. Sumanthiran spoke about, how do you see the opposition moving forward in this particular moment? What are your thoughts? What are the conversations that people need to be aware of? Because I believe a lot of the conversations happen behind closed doors, which is fair enough, but this is an opportunity for you to also share with the people as to what the plans are in terms of the main opposition. Over to you. You have to unmute.
Thanks, Bhavani and CPA, for inviting me. Before I get to answering that question, I would want to say that different people view this differently as to what the causes of the present crisis are. We clearly see it as a political crisis, which has led to an economic crisis. Sri Lanka has had its economic structural problems for a long time, right? It has had its deficits on the budget. It has had its, the balance of payments deficits and so forth. Those structural problems have been there, but different governments have handled it, some more successfully than others. What has recently happened is unprecedented. I see it as a failure of policy, and I also see it as a failure of management by the present government. Why I say it's a political crisis is you have a president elected overwhelmingly. You have a parliament which has a 2/3 majority for the president's party. And he also then goes on to actually strengthen his position by the 20th Amendment. So he bypasses Parliament, he bypasses his cabinet revolts against him. He does all of that, and he has caused a huge issue. Now the economic crisis is bad policy. I mean, as Mr. Sumanthiran said, right, the drop in revenue, drastic drop, right, without any scientific basis for it. Generally, there has been no science. I would just make that general point in the decisions that is taken, whether it is agriculture and chemical fertilizer, or even something more recent like the appointment of a vice chancellor to the University of Colombo. I mean, there's no science, there's no logic. Why have committees? Why have marking systems? Why get recommendations if you don't really want to follow them? So generally, they moved away from the scientific principle. So there is an issue here. Then what has happened in the political crisis is what we have seen in history. Authoritarianism has built up. And we don't like to use the word dictatorship because it sounds so drastic, and after all, we are Sri Lankans. We will never allow that. But then what do you call a dictatorship? I think, and the name comes to me very quick, where recently in a book, Making It Big by Vinod Chowdhury, he says that if big business came, then a member of the Nepali royal family had to have 51% ownership, right? Then if you look at Indonesia and you look at the Suharto story, you see that they record that about $25 billion was siphoned off over a 32-year period. You look at the Sri Lanka story, because right, you have 5 members of the same family in the cabinet of the country, and 70% of the budget, right, being decided by those 5 members. I mean, what are we calling this? If this is not authoritarianism, right? And generally, authoritarian rule is generally family rule, and also generally, if you look at history, you also have they befriend the military, and they befriend the military by generally giving the military certain favors. That's the history, right? If you look at history around the world, that's the way it happens. So we have to really, I believe that we have a political crisis, and it has led to an economic crisis. I agree with Dr. Harini. This cry that out there is beyond economics. People are also calling for a systems change. We have to look beyond the Rajapaksas. There are so many things that are wrong, and this is a wonderful opportunity to actually put some of these things right. And I guess some of us came into politics with the dream that we might be able to actually do something in putting things right. But as you said, there are faces also in the gall face, as Annie said. I'm sure that those who came with the intention of doing what is right don't mind at any stage, right? Basically vacating our positions if others think that they can make a change. I'm very happy when I hear that cry, because I'm so glad that people have come to this understanding, right? And fortunately, I came to the same understanding 12 years ago. And that is why I stepped out of my private career, right, to make the change. And it would be great if some of those people out there could join the existing political parties, come forward, make the change, or even form new political parties. And if they could come and actually make the change. So I agree with Harini. You know, there is an identity crisis, there's an accountability, there's a justice issues, equality issues, so many different things, right? That need to be addressed in this crisis. Corruption is a big one, right? Now, I would step here from looking at it academically, and you have to forgive me for this, and trying to say, you know, how do you actually convert these changes? So you have to make the political changes, and you have to use parliament as an instrument in making the political changes. Then you can also use, right, the parliament to make the legal changes. Now, I don't believe that Sri Lanka's problem is lack of law, right? Certainly, we need laws, we need to really tighten them, and I will say something quickly about it. But also our problem is often more implementation is really the issue in this country. But if you look at the laws, right, independence of the central bank, which has been a recent huge problem, because they are responsible basically for financial sector stability and for inflation. There is a new central bank law. We have basically brought it up in 2019 with the central bank and Minister of Finance. M.A.Sumanthiran was minister, and I was state minister at that time. And the present governor was there. The former governor of the central bank was involved with it. I'm telling this government, bring that law now. Don't delay that law. If you look at corruption, anti-corruption, CBA, right? It has to be made independent. There is a law. In 2019, the laws were worked out. It must be with the Attorney General's department. I'm telling this government, bring that law immediately. Don't delay. We don't have to wait for any change of government. Bring that law, right? Assets and liabilities, right? We all talk about it, right? People are now saying in Golface, everybody needs to be audited. You need to have a statement to be audited. Without a statement, there's nothing to audit. So we have worked that out as well. We will present it in Parliament, you know, within the next few days, right? Actually, and we are telling the government, we are presenting it only as opposition. You bring it and you implement it. Then the proceeds of crime. Work has been done in the previous period, right? And if officials or politicians have stacked up their wealth in other countries, right? That law principles were agreed, but the law hasn't been finalized. And I know lawyers are working on it, and also organizations, civil society organizations who are very interested in this, right? are working on this, and we would encourage them to really bring this as well. We don't have to wait for the change of government actually to bring this down. Then the other thing is, I would say on the implementation side, we have an Attorney General's Department, advisor to the government, right? And there is a conflict of interest because when governments change, think differently. So lots of withdrawals of cases. We are saying borrow from the best practices of other countries, international, right? Create an independent public prosecutor's office. It must work independently, right? This will hasten the process of justice. So this is something else that we probably need to look at very quickly. But going to the question that you raised, Bhavani, specifically, now what are we going to do as an opposition, as a political party in Parliament? As you know, the opposition has presented as a private member's bill, the 21st Amendment, and Mr. Sumanthiran went into the details of it. I think it's a very comprehensive amendment, right? And we are urging the government, don't delay, right? Everybody in the country is basically asking for the change. And as we saw in the recent surveys, and I think CPA had a survey as well, that people are saying change the system, change the presidential system, right? So who is holding it back? People are suffering, and you can see that when you do the research, right? So we are people's representatives. We can't hold it back because the people are saying that. It's like holding a referendum. People are saying, make the change. We are representatives. We need to make that change. So we are telling the government, right, bring that law. And I would say it this way, as it gives a dignified way in which the issues at hand could be dealt with. So we're telling the government actually bring this and bring this very, very quickly. Then on the two no confidence motions, as Mr. Sumanthiran explained, there are two. We have basically, as an opposition, signed up for the no confidence motion against the government. It's under discussion that Article 42 of the Constitution of bringing a no confidence motion against the president, right? And a decision will be taken, right, this week. In action, principle decision has been taken because we haven't seen a movement from government that as an opposition, we are going to present these no confidence motions. We will be discussing the details, over the next couple of days. And this week, you will see those brought into Parliament as well. Then there has been some conversation about should there be an interim government, will you all join an interim government and so forth. I must make it absolutely clear that we are not looking for positions. We are not looking to join any interim government. We would want to have a mandate from the people. And then if the people give us a mandate, we will form a government. However, we are very conscious that people are undergoing huge hardships. We need to have an agreement with IMF. We need to reform. We need to basically come into some agreement with our creditors on our debt. We need to get bridging finance to send people home from the queues that they are in. And we need to provide a social protection program as well. And therefore, even if we have to have an election, and the election is going to take some time, right? Then an interim government conversation does come. But if we are committed to abolishing the executive presidency, right, Rajapaksas go home, because that is what the struggle on the streets are about. And we are representing those who are protesting in Parliament. And if there is agreement on that, then we can consider other arrangements. Thank you.
Thank you, Eran. And I have to say, this might be the first panel where I've had the panelists, members of Parliament, sticking to the time. So thank you very much for making my job very easy. We have received a lot of questions on Facebook, and for anyone, I think Charitha just got a power cut, but we still have him. So we've got a lot of questions on Facebook. I believe there's a lot of interest because of the timeliness of such a conversation, but there's also a few who send questions beforehand. So let me kind of put those questions and I'll open it to the panelists as to how you want to deal with it. One is, there is talk about abolishing the executive presidency, and I think everyone's spoken about this. That's a clear demand as well in terms of change. How is this achievable? And I think maybe Mr. Sumanthiran and maybe Mr. Eran Wickramaratne, because of the private members bill, maybe if one of you can maybe go into some of the details. What is it that people need to be aware of? Because what does a private members bill mean? What's the process? What's the time frame? Because I think all of these conversations, there is a lot of expectation that things will move very fast. And already, I think Charitha alluded to this. There's been several weeks that Parliament has been sitting despite the crisis and the protests, and people are not seeing results. So what is it that really can be done in terms of abolishing the executive presidency? What's the time frame? What's the process? A question in terms of a political solution, and this is something that's been a problem in Sri Lanka for a long time in terms of the structural violence, the discrimination, the war, and even in the post-war, the question of power sharing. Is that a possibility? Is a federal, I mean, this is a question from the audience. Is a federal solution possible? Is it possible to move from a unitary to a federal solution? That's a question from the audience. There's a question in terms of judicial review, and this is something that again has been discussed. Why is that not being, why hasn't anything been done in terms of judicial review? Again, up to the panelists to take this up. And finally, the question, and I think this has been alluded to, is the demand is very clear in terms of Rajapaksa's going home. And what is the next step? How is this possible? And we've gone into some of these questions, but I hope the panelists can take some of it. Charitha Herath will join us shortly, but can I ask maybe Mr. Sumanthiran to start this?
Thank you, Bhavani. I think we need to start from 2015 or thereabouts, because in 2014, there was a call. Actually, it started soon after the 18th Amendment, so it dates back. But when executive presidency was consolidated and strengthened by the 18th Amendment, there was a reaction, and then when people saw what was happening, that's when in 2014, it intensified and the people were ready to give a mandate to abolish it. And that mandate was given in 2015 January. And a process of constitutional reform started with People's Representative Committee. I believe Harini was part of that. They came up with an excellent report within a few months. Then we had the Constitutional Assembly with a steering committee of which I was a part, and there were several subcommittees, 7, all of whom worked hard, and we had an interim report as well. Unfortunately, political sort of power plays started at that point, and then we lost steam, and in 2019, the Easter bomb blast took place. With that, the whole conversation changed in the country. But the reason why I'm mentioning all of this is that the abolition of executive presidency was decided on by the people and a mandate given for it. The issue of devolution that you raised was dealt with in that draft new constitution bill that was presented to Parliament on the 19th of January 2019. So we even had a draft. All of that was worked out, large scale consultations took place, all of that. But one was the coexistence between the two parties that formed the government broke down, and then the Easter bomb blast there was a narrative created in the country that you needed a strong ruler, and all of this was shifted aside, and we had as they say, against the run of play, Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa was elected. So now if people realize that that was a mistake and that he must go home, we must immediately go back to that point. That is what makes us believe that executive presidency must be abolished, because people had come to that realization. Actually, they came to the realization in 1994 when they gave President Chandrika Bandaranaike a mandate, and even Mahinda Rajapaksa's first term, he promised to abolish executive presidency. So repeatedly, that position has been taken by the people. And so we must view 2019 November and 2020 August elections as an aberration and not something that is a dominant sort of people's will. Now, if people have come to that realization, yes, we must move fast and do it. As someone said, this is one way of actually giving President Gotabaya Rajapaksa a dignified exit, because you abolish the post. And and there's a time like as well. You asked that question, whether how long it will take. If it's a private member's bill, it will take a long time. Even if it is presented soon, there's a 6-month time that the government gets to give a report on that. So it can't be fast-tracked unless the government actually cooperates. But we can suspend standing orders, but for that you anyway need a simple majority in parliament. There are a few technicalities to overcome. The government must take it upon itself, and I have suggested this to the Prime Minister and through him to the President also, that at a time like this, the right thing for the government to do is to take over the private member's bill put forward by the General Secretary of the SJB, make it a government bill, gazette it, present it in Parliament, pass it with the 2/3, and leave it to the people. Eventually, it's the people who have to decide. It will require a referendum. Some people say it doesn't. I don't agree with that. Even if it doesn't, I think it must be put to a referendum. Leave it to the people. The government can say, all right. The president can say, I was elected by, 6.9 million or whatever. This is just 100,000 or 200,000 people who are demonstrating. Right, all right, but then I'll leave it to the 16 million voters of this country to decide whichever way you want. So I think that must happen. And in that, this is not the concentration of power in one individual is one issue, but concentration of power in one dominant or majority community is also an issue, and that's a long-term issue that the country has been facing. So there must be adjustments made to that, and the most well-known adjustment is a federal system. If you don't want to call it federal, India has a system. They don't call it federal. Some call it quasi-federal. But the idea is that people in their own localities, in their own regions, they get to manage their own affairs, whilst the center, handles matters that cannot be handled at the periphery, like foreign affairs, currency, national defense, can actually be managed. Why should people in Colombo, why should I, who represent Jaffna, sit and make decisions about what kind of development must happen in the district of Monragala or in the southern province, and vice versa? So leave it to the people. This is the principle of subsidiarity as well. So sharing powers of governance as much as possible at the lowest level is an important element of democracy. So those reforms, in my opinion, can all come It is only at moments like this, when there is a lot of fluidity, when the country is in crisis, that a lot of progressive change also can take place. So I believe those of us who are involved in these matters at this time must be bold enough to take these things head on and present it to the people and guide the people in the right way, and reverse a lot of the negative governance structures that we've had and injustices that have gone on for a long time.
Thank you, Mr. Sumanthiran. Does anyone else want to come in on the question about abolishing the executive presidency and next steps? I think Mr. Sumanthiran covered most of it, but please, if there are any others who want to come in on this.
Bhavani, can I
Please.
make a point? I think I could agree with Mr. Sumanthiran on this second point that he raised. It is true that we are still to decide on what is the post-colonial Sri Lankan state structure. We are still in that debate, and we need to go for that one, and that's, I agree. But this executive presidency issue, I think it is true that there were some elections where main parties have put this abolition argument to the people, and people have mandated, and there were some other elections where four executive presidency mandates were also given. So that is one thing. And the second thing is that we just need to look at why we need to get rid of this system, and we need to go back into the old Westminster system. I agree there are a lot of issues that we are experiencing of executive presidency experiences, but at the same time there were some good part of it as well. So we just, I think actually I have seen a couple of people in these days who are also writing on this issue, and many wrong governing steps were taken before 1977 through the system that we are going to go ahead. Now we are going to focus that the Westminster system, the prime minister driven governments. So we have good side and bad side of this both systems. I think we need to have a very careful kind of observation on these things. This is not to say that we just need to keep the presidency, or we don't need to go into the old system or whatever, the prime minister driven system or parliamentary system, but we need to look at it from very broader perspective. That is just one thing that I would like to add.
Thank you, Charitha. I think the challenges of power cut means we keep losing and getting our panelists back. So that speaks to the present reality we're facing. But this question about things are going to get worse before it gets better. I mean, we are talking to the IMF. There's other assistance schemes being looked at, but nothing really has come through to show there is a particular plan for the next few months, let alone next few years. Hello, Harini. Thank you for joining again.
Hi.
Hi. And thank you for everyone for bearing with us during the power cuts and all of that. I mean, this is the new norm. But coming back to the point, we are going in for harder times. I mean, we are talking about difficulties now, but it looks like it's going to get worse. The protesters, I keep saying this, are very clear in their demands. They want a change. There are two demands, very clear demands, is connected to the Rajapaksas. Now, several weeks on, the Rajapaksas, the president and the prime minister remain in office. Now, to the public, to the protesters, while there may be discussions among members of parliament and political parties and various negotiations that lead to proposals of an interim government, their demands are not met. So how is this going to be addressed? I mean, stability is one thing for sure, very important, but are you ignoring the tens of thousands who have come to the streets in the last few weeks, peacefully protesting? So what is it, while Parliament meets on Wednesday, what is it that you can tell the protesters, you can tell the citizens as to how do you see this, without just saying, yes, we need to see this, we need stability? Are there particular proposals that you can make so that the protesters also hear very clearly they are being heard? Now, the other thing that has been happening in the last few weeks is the fact that yesterday we saw tens of the protesters being removed. Like that, every couple of days, too regularly, we see intimidation, scare tactics being used against protesters. Does this mean the military is going to be called out at some point? Would that not lead to further instability? So I think we are in a critical moment. Everyone recognizes that. But as members of Parliament, how do you respond to this clear demand now? And I understand some things may not be possible. What are the other ways, peacefully, democratically, that citizens also, what can they also be doing? So that's connected to a few questions that have come to us, posing it to all the four panelists.
Bhavani, shall I go first?
Please.
Yeah, I think I think we have to recognize how extraordinary a moment this is, and we can't sort of continue to look. Maybe we can't look for solutions within the conventional paths that we have usually followed. I mean, yes, this is not the first time that a constitutional crisis has emerged or where a government has faced something like this, but I do really think that this is unprecedented in that this has been created not by something that has happened within Parliament, but from pressure outside. And it's not just the protests at Galface, but these are protests that we are seeing around the country. These are protests that have been developing for several weeks and months. So, in no sense of the word, can we sort of take this moment or understand this moment as something that has been generated purely through a constitutional crisis within Parliament? It has been driven by public protests. So, if we do not respond to that public protest, we are failing the public. I mean, and that's critical. We are in Parliament representing the public. We have been voted, appointed, whatever it is, through a mandate given to us by the public. So if we cannot ignore that what is happening outside and sort of look for solutions in my view, in the name of stability, however difficult that may be, right? So, that is what I think is key. So, yes, we need to do things fast, but we also need to not do things merely for the sake of sort of stability or just because we have had no experience with doing something differently. So, in that sense, that is why I would imagine that a new mandate of the people is something that has to happen sooner rather than later. There will need to be some interim arrangement till that new mandate can be given. But I do think, and this is the position of our party as well, that nothing can move unless the president and the prime minister resign. I mean, or that there's a change in who is holding, and how that happens, whether it's a resignation, whether it's a no confidence motion, whether it's an impeachment, whatever it is, the president and the prime minister have to resign. A new cabinet must be appointed, but that new cabinet should also have a very limited mandate, because all these other things that we are talking about, the new, it requires in a way a new social contract between the people and the rulers of this country. That is what people are demanding. And I don't think that that social contract can be achieved with sort of ad hoc measures or sort of revisions or amendments to an existing constitution. What we need a brand new contract. So what we need to look at in the meantime is what we need to do to get out of this crisis. And it's very clear what we need to do. I mean, the government's refusal to do it is the problem. The president and the prime minister have to step down. That is what the people of this country are demanding. And that is what we as parliamentarians also have to keep pushing for. And once that happens, or if the government, if the president and prime minister agree to this, how we are going to function in the meantime, what kind of interim arrangement is necessary is up for discussion. I mean, we can all sit and discuss that, but those two demands must be met. That's what the public are demanding, and I don't think we as parliamentarians have any right to ignore that demand and carry on as if the protests outside are not happening.
Thank you.
Can
Harini.
I
Yes,
just say one sentences? Like, I think we can understand some people are demanding president to step down. But my position is that in democratically, how we could overcome this kind of thing. Like suppose actually there are many demands in many times on democratic process, but we have some tools, some processes to address those demands. Now, I agree with Harini that we could go into an election. That is one good way to look at it. And then there should be a way that the people could express, or people could materialize their demands. And as she correctly said, that brand new contracts could emerge. I agree with that thing. But I don't agree with her that the way that we need to act is the way that she said. Like if you have some people who maybe we can even if we imagine that all the people who came to Golface were the people who voted for Gotabaya Rajapaksa, even if we think so. But I don't know, like whether we just need to take a decision and you just need to resign, leaving all the other people's positions. Like there are different kind of existence at the moment. Some people came to Golface, and as you said, some people were protesting in small towns, and some people were at homes without doing anything. They were just looking at the issue. And I mean, I am also representing some places, some electorates, and the people were at homes and they were just looking at the issue, that what is going on. Actually, they're true that they were also facing the same economic issues, and they were also having some criticism on the government, but to step down. But I mean, I don't want to represent any of these positions, but my position is that we just need to look at how we could overcome this kind of situations, and what are the processes, what are the instruments, democratic instruments that we have in order to go ahead and to get out from this kind of
Bhavani, may I just jump in?
Yes, sure.
On both issues, Charitha said this earlier with regard to executive presidency. Now with regard to
just add something. Harini said, yeah.
Thank you, Charitha. Yes, Mr. Sumanthiran.
With regard to
It's not clear.
Rajapaksa's election and how many people are now protesting and so on. That is why I suggested the route of a referendum. Now he says, what's the democratic instrument we have, right? So give it
I
to
agree
the people.
with that, yeah.
Yeah, give it to the people straight away, right? and without it being focused on an individual by name, put it to the system. So then both issues are resolved. Eventually, the people have to decide. So I would say that's a democratic institution instrument that you have, and that is why I suggest that you use that. And I also support Harini's suggestion that a general election must be held, because we can't only decide on executive presidency or the particular president. There is widespread disenchantment about the quality, the caliber, the conduct of members of parliament as well. It's true that these are the people who elected all of us, but somehow suddenly they were woken to their rights, and they're saying these things. So give them the elections, let them elect the right people. So both must happen. I think a referendum on the presidential executive presidency, which will decide on Gotabaya Rajapaksa's fate as well, and a general election must be held at the earliest.
Thank you, Mr. Sumanthiran. Eran, there is a question in terms of corruption, and that, I mean, you spoke to some of this, and I'm directing it to you, but it's open to the others as well. In terms of the corrupt practices, and this has come as a message. So now laws can do particular things, and you spoke about was never enacted. There is now the proposal of bringing the appointments to the central bank through the Constitution Council, if that happens. These are mere proposals still. What is it that can be done now? Because the demand that also has come from the protesters is that there is new levels of corruption. And this is something the Yahapalana government couldn't achieve, and it seems this government also has failed. So what are the things that could be done immediately?
Yeah, so as you correctly pointed out, we are an opposition. And an opposition can only bring private members' bills. Government has to basically decide, right, whether they are going to take on some of these private member bills and own it and put it forward. And then only the legislative changes can be actually made. So that's in the hands of the government. This government's approach that the president can invite people to come and sit in an interim government without making political changes is a non-starter. That just won't happen, right? That won't happen. So therefore, everything we have talked about, particularly on the anti-corruption laws, etc., this government can bring them in. Right? There's no need, but this is nothing to be politically partisan or anything like that, right? These are bills. I mean, they could move amendments to them. They could actually bring it and they could implement it. I agree with what Mr. Sumanthiran and Dr. Harini said, right? A mandate of the people is the best at this point in time, right? But there might have to be some interim arrangement, even if you're going for election, right? There will have to be, because between now and then. Now, we are not looking to come into an interim government. However, our condition on which we will not waver is that the executive presidency has to go, right? And the way to test it is, right, for the government to actually adopt the 21st Amendment that has been proposed, and then Parliament to vote on it. And after Parliament votes on it, we cannot implement it anyway without a referendum. So we obviously want to get the public's consent before it is actually implemented. I think if you reverse it and only do a referendum and then try to enact it, you're actually postponing it further, which means that the country will go deeper and deeper into an economic crisis. It's a matter of timing now, right? Deeper and deeper into an economic crisis, right? We are having basically discussions within a democratic frame. Protesters are being extremely peaceful. You talked about intimidation of protesters, right? This situation can actually change the longer we delay. Because after all, if people don't have petrol and gas and electricity, right? That's at one level. But if you start having your food shortages, and I spoke about this nearly a month ago in Parliament and said that they will come from all the data and information we had, and basically requested the government to actually send ambassadors into the South Asian countries, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and actually look for food aid, because it will take about a month to put the food aid in place. This could go somewhere else. That is why we are saying the government has to move quickly. They have to move quickly, because after that, things will be out of control. So this hiding behind this thing that, we have a mandate, we are waiting, till, for another mandate to make a change is all absolute nonsense. I would say this, right? And I'm not Jnana, right? But Prime Minister Rajapaksa will be gone within days. But we are not interested in that only. President Rajapaksa has to go, and the constitutional amendments have to be enacted. That is what the public are demanding. That is what we stand for. If that is done, right, and it can be done in 6 weeks, because if it is adopted this week in Parliament, right, within 6 weeks you can actually have a vote. We've worked that out with the experts, right? If it can be done, then the referendum can come down. Then we are even willing to consider cooperating, because we don't want to see people going through hardships. These are practical steps that we are taking. We understand that the demand is for systems change, but we need to do quickly what we have to do to avert the crisis at a higher level. And I'm in complete agreement on the issues of system change, and we just need to get there, but we need to handle what's at hand immediately.
Thank you. And I think we've covered most of the questions that have come. I mean, does anyone else have any last remarks? Because I did promise we will end this by 7, and it is 7. Harini?
No, just to say briefly that while all this is going on, there is an economic crisis also, and whatever negotiations we do on that line, we also need to make sure that we pay attention to the needs of the most vulnerable. I mean, there's a food crisis, there's a medicine shortage, and all of this is affecting certain segments of the population disproportionately. And I think whatever negotiations and discussions go on, and as Eran said, the longer we delay, the harder it's going to be. So this government is actually being extremely irresponsible in not allowing for a resolution of the political crisis, because that the resolution of the political crisis is essential for addressing these economic issues that we are facing, which, so far has already caused several deaths, and it could get worse, right? So the longer we delay, the harder things are going to get, and then how we are going to manage the situation will become even more difficult as people become more desperate when there are food shortages, or when their livelihoods completely come to a standstill.
Thank you, Harini. If any, Charitha, do you have any last remarks? If not, we can.
Yeah. Just one little thing. Like I just look at the point that Mr. Eran Wickramaratne raised. Actually, we don't need to delay anything by putting any different things. And I have been, I'm talking about myself, but true that the government should act fast. I agree with that. And this economic issue has been there throughout, the time of the couple of governments. But still, we are now in the power, and we just need to look at it in a very broader perspective. I agree with him that we are not supposed to delay anything. But
I think we lost Dr. Charitha Herath again. Okay, we have
just
him
need
back
to
again.
take. We just need to take.
The important thing is to realize this is a very complex issue that we're facing, and a lot of eyes on the Parliament, which commences sittings on Wednesday. There are different things that are being explored. But as we speak, the demands are getting louder and clearer in terms of go home, Gotabaya, go home, Rajapaksa. And in that context, that whole notion that some of you alluded to, that we cannot delay this. And I think there are other avenues, democratic avenues provided in the Constitution, where really the president should be resigning. I think tens of thousands have been saying this for weeks now. This is not an overnight thing. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be heard by particular individuals. In the absence of the president taking any steps, I think it's incumbent on now the political parties to hear the views and the demands of the protesters. Different things are now moving, and I hope that moves very fast. I think all of you alluded to a few weeks, potentially a few months, where these things can be realized. But in the meantime, there are going to be severe hardships. And that's the one that we'll have to be looking to. So we don't have very specific answers, but I hope this event at least gave the public some answers as to what is going to be moving forward. And I think it's important on all of us to keep the pressure and to engage with members of parliament and other policymakers, because this is a unique but critical time. Different things are happening, different things are moving. The energy you get from the protest sites is it's quite amazing at one level. So in our engagement, this is one of the different initiatives we are looking to engage in, identifying and exploring next steps, but also keeping the pressure on the members of parliament and others. And I think that's an important thing to do. So we will be having more of such events that engage us on different issues. And do send your comments, do send your questions. This is an ongoing process. It doesn't end today. And I hope all the those who've been watching also take note of some of the steps that were ironed out today in terms of what is likely to move in the next few weeks. Finally, I want to thank the 4 members of parliament. I know it's a very busy time. Some were traveling. Some had to engage with this discussion during power cuts. I mean, we can't even see some of them at the moment. So thank you. I know many others actually texted, called and said they're unable to log in because of their own power cuts. So we are in very, very unprecedented times, but we will continue to engage, and do send in your comments so that we can take this forward. Thank you.